Hi everyone, Alex here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to say that at the start of July, myself and Gareth, our chef, went down to London to the Katie Awards, where we won the Sustainable Business Award. And I just wanted to take a chance to thank everyone who works in the cafe so hard, all of the team, and everyone who works in the kitchen for everything they do in our catering and hospitality side. Excellent job. This is your award. Well done. Let's get on with the podcast. Thank you. Love is like wildflowers, blooming in the most unlikely of places. Welcome back to our barn at FarmED for the FarmED podcast. I'm Alex Dye. I'll be your farm hand for today. And today, I'm here to talk to Director of Cotswold Seeds, beekeeper, canoe enthusiast, dog father, and an all-round lovely chap. It's Paul Totterdell. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Alex. You're very, very kind. Probably too kind.
So you're the Director of Cotswold Seeds. How did you get involved with the world of wildflowers and seeds and agriculture in general?
Well, it's a pretty interesting story. It's not the traditional way into an agricultural job, and it is a very agricultural business, Cotswold Seeds. That's one of the great things about it, is you get to talk to farmers and deal with people who manage the land all the time. But my training wasn't traditionally in that. My training was in IT, believe it or not. I did a degree in intelligent systems, which is effectively AI, and a media system, multimedia systems. So it seems really weird that I ended up in an agricultural company, but it happened that way because I just needed a job in my gap year, really. Before I went to university, I thought, well, I'm a big lad, I can move some seed around. Why don't I apply for a labouring job in a warehouse? And really, really enjoyed it. It opened my eyes to a rural world that I hadn't seen before, even though I'd lived in the countryside my whole life and even worked on a farm occasionally. But yeah, so I said to Ian, after university, through which I worked high days and holidays at Cotswold Seeds, just mixing seed, which was fascinating in its own right. I said to Ian, well, I could go, to London and sit behind a desk, which is not what I really wanted to do, but I could have done, and programmed for a living and done very well, thank you very much. But I didn't want to do that. So I gave Ian the option of me staying at Cotswold Seeds. The angle being that with my IT knowledge, my computer knowledge, I could sort of update the company and bring it up to the modern standards, what with computing and so on. At that point, they were only on very sort of rudimentary IT systems and things, and I brought that element to it. So that was nice to be able to build the Cotswold Seeds website proper for the first time, to build a really good computer network, all these things that are completely unrelated to grass and seeds and plants and wildflowers and all the things that you mentioned. But that's how it began, and then it went from strength to strength. I was spending more and more time in the office doing those IT tasks, shared with still working downstairs in the warehouse. That was a fun balance to strike. And then eventually I started to listen to Ian. I started to absorb by osmosis, all the wonderful information that he was talking to farmers about, and the way that he interacted with farmers, and the importance of all that customer service and things, but in a very human way, in a very normal human way. And so, best training I could have had. And as they say, the rest is down to history. And here I am now, and joining Ian on the board.
So I think I've jumped the gun a little bit by assuming that a lot of people will know. I assume most people will know who Cotswold Seeds are and what you do. But who are Cotswold Seeds and what do you do?
It's a good question, because everyone puts it in their own context, don't they? And everyone has their own view of what their own business does. So Cotswold Seeds, I would say, is a small, very approachable, friendly company, and we have experts in small seeds. And what we do is we sit on the phone and we talk to farmers for as long as they want to talk. And quite often we don't make a sale. We're quite happy with that. And I think that's probably what makes us a bit different. We can afford to spend time talking to customers for long periods of time, really understanding what it is that they want from every little acre that they're planting. That and the ability to then mix bespoke, which is, it's amazing just how many people love that service. But put those two things together, really, really good quality mixing and good quality advice with no limits. And that's what sort of built our business. And now we speak to 20,000 farmers. We've got an amazing team back at Cotswold Seeds. Sam Lane is now heading that team. I've passed over to him, and he's doing an absolutely spectacular job of it. He's turning that place around and making changes that I would never have made, which is what it's all about, And I'm really really chuffed with how that's going. It's really going in a really positive direction, and we're doing more investing now in the company and equipment and people, and so yeah, it's just a really nice place to be. But the key is not to get too big. You get too big, you lose control over the quality of the advice, and it becomes you end up with a small fish in a big ocean. I think we really like that sort of personal, sort of family atmosphere that we have, and we have a good giggle. Very, very busy when we're in season, but very quiet out of season. And we've started other business enterprises to try and keep us busy and keep everyone employed, and that's been a lovely thing to be able to do. We started up a company called Cotswold Logs some years ago because we just hated laying people off over the winter, and it was a bit of a nightmare because then you had to retrain in the spring when it got busy on seeds again. So it was really, really nice to be able to maintain that staff through the winter by delivering logs, of all things. But where we are in the Cotswolds, it's all quite a wealthy area, and there's a lot of log burners around. And nobody wants to stack logs. So we saw an opportunity there, and we thought, well, that's what we can do during the winter. We underestimated the overlap. We underestimated how many people would be buying logs in the middle of June and July. Yes, it happens. But not too many, thankfully. But yeah, it's been a voyage of discovery. But it's really complemented seeds, I think, and I think it means that the seed mixes that go out the door are just getting better and better because they're being mixed by people who really know what they're doing, and they've been with us for a long time. And,
and by retaining those staff over the times where you would otherwise have had to let them go, like you say, you're keeping not only the skill, but also their enthusiasm. They feel rewarded for
and
that.
The family atmosphere, and we share experiences, and it's not hello and cheerio every year. And that's what it was like when I first started. There's only 3 of us in the warehouse, and I was the temporary one. I was only there at holidays and things, and it's a whole different company now, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic to see it grow. It's fantastic to be working alongside Ian now on the less day-to-day related matters, and Sam is doing an absolutely spectacular job of that back at Cotswold Seeds. And I'm just really proud and grateful, and it's just a lovely organisation to work for. We're not. The nice thing is that we're not commercial. We're not particularly commercial. We don't. We just wait for people to call us because it's such a lovely position to be in, because we have the knowledge and we love sharing it with people. And and that's partly why we have, we're so fond of FarmED and so proud of that achievement that we've managed to create with the team that runs FarmED, because we're currently at FarmED at the moment. They run a spectacular ship here, and now Cotswold Seeds staff, we rarely get involved, and it's fantastic. And I think that's the way it should be. But we dip in and out as best we can, and we try and keep the connection going. But it's just lovely to see that knowledge exchange part of the business grow. And to have its own identity and be operating completely under its own steam, and that's lovely. It's a nice resource to have, and to see it grow, it's amazing.
I think I'll put a pin in that just for a moment and come back to the FarmED thing.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you could tell us, if you're a farmer, why would you want to buy lots of grass seeds? Why would you want to buy grass seeds or wildflower seeds? Why would you be interested in that sort of thing?
So there's lots of reasons. I mean, a huge part of the UK is managed agriculturally, the vast majority of it, and a vast majority of that vast majority is grassland. So I think you're talking about roughly, about 75% of UK's land is farmed agriculturally, and a huge proportion of that is grassland. And all the grass that you see out there in the fields when you're driving past on main roads and small roads and things, that doesn't just live there automatically. That hasn't just grown there by itself. We've had to plant that. And a lot of people don't realise that grass needs to be planted. It doesn't just grow naturally in an area. So traditionally in the UK, most of the grass that's sown is ryegrass. And ryegrass was absolutely fantastic just after the war. Loads of fertiliser available because, of course, all the efforts that were going into the war to produce all the various different oil-based materials for the war, those companies had nothing to do once the war had completed, thankfully, and it was over. So what they did is they changed their focus over to fertiliser production, and so that's why there was such a glut of fertiliser available and so cheaply. And so ryegrass works really well, fertiliser, and woof, up you come, the green revolution. Lots of lovely grass to feed the nation and the animals, which in turn feed the nation, as well as all the crops and things. But that ryegrass isn't very good in extreme weather conditions. It really struggles in the dry. It really struggles in the heat. And it's very, very good at having really, really good feed quality, lots of carbohydrate in there and sugars and things, which is great. We need that as well. But that's not everything. And because of its limitations with its growth habit and root structure, Cotswold Seeds have been looking for many, many years at different novel plants that we can plant alongside the ryegrasses, and sometimes without any ryegrass whatsoever. And eventually you get to mixtures, you may have heard of them, called herbal lays, diverse multi-species mixtures. And that's really our USP, because there's not a lot of expertise out there in it to be able to pull these mixtures together from lots of different species and create a mixture. And there's lots of technical difficulties with creating mixtures and things that you need to know. And that's the information we have over at Cotswold Seeds. And we can put all these plants together on the fly from experience alone, to create mixtures specifically for certain purposes. One purpose might be to feed cattle, sheep. Another purpose might be just to make it look green. Another purpose might be to get a subsidy payment in order to plant pollen and nectar margins around your fields for the birds and the bees, which of course you're all very, very interested in, I know.
Of course.
Others are beetle banks, things that encourage the movement of beetles across fields, all sorts of different environmental schemes that involve using these small seeds. And so what we generally do is we do the grasses, legumes like clovers, all sorts of different clovers, herbs like chicory and burnet and sheep's parsley, but also all the things like the wildflowers, and all the different environmental schemes that are out there. Lots of different prescriptions and different mixtures you can put together that each need to be tailored to each individual field.
Am I right in thinking that herbal lays as a farming concept is not necessarily a new thing?
No, not
it's
at all.
something. And I think most people in the farming circle in the UK would probably be in agreement that Ian Wilkinson and yourselves at Cotswold Seeds have kind of brought it back big time, the herbal lay. But it's looking into older ideas of things that used to work and things that people used to do with pasture land. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100% right. We're not reinventing the wheel, but we kind of are. We're not reinventing it in the sense that it was a traditional practice. It was something which every farmer did almost without even trying. You were growing fields that contained many species of different plant, and not every weed was seen as a weed. Some weeds were seen as beneficial or medicinal plants, or perhaps we didn't know at that point, but the animals were eating them, and we were getting the benefit maybe without even knowing that was happening. Then the green revolution that I mentioned, with the advent of that fertilizer being readily available, meant that the ryegrasses grew really well. So all the seed producers and all the seed companies decided to grow and sell ryegrass only, pretty much only, maybe a bit of white clover, maybe a bit of timothy. And then they moved on to the production of these this wider spectrum of different species, but still only very few people are doing it. And what we're able to do these days compared to the olden days, as it were, is that we can use modern plant varieties, and this is the bit where we are kind of reinventing the wheel. We can use modern plant varieties in an old-fashioned system to try and get the most out of that older-fashioned system. But it has its disadvantages. Unfortunately, with all the breeding that's gone on, because of the availability of this nitrogen fertilizer, that means that the breeding has been done in line with that response. So naturally, farmers want plants that respond really, really well to nitrogen. But sadly, not many do. Well, they do. The grasses tend to respond quite well, but a lot of the other plants, which are really important, really don't like a lot of nitrogen, partly because it's their job to fix it themselves. Things like clover. So clover is really, really important to not have to use nitrogen, because clover will fix that nitrogen from the atmosphere, as we know it's abundant in the atmosphere. And they're so clever. They've got this little arrangement with bacteria in the soil, and they do a little swap, basically carbohydrate for nitrogen. And so the plant says, look, I've photosynthesized, I've got lots of carbohydrate from photosynthesizing, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap it with soil bacteria, and I'm going to get from the soil bacteria the nitrogen from the air, effectively, that the bacteria process. So it's a swap, basically, with carbohydrates for nitrogen. And so that's just a synergy, that's one synergy between two types of plant. And in some of these herbal lays, there's 17 types of plants. So there's loads of synergies still to discover and to understand. What we do is we see it, and the team back at Seeds every day are advising on how to achieve lots of different characteristics from one mixture. And I think that's a really attractive prospect, to be able to get a payment from the government and to get forage from it and to have these ecosystem benefits to encourage the development and the maintenance of all these birds, bees, insects, all these things. With herbal lays, we're able to do all of them. They are a bit more difficult, but they've got a lot of potential, I think. They're not the answer to everything, but they're part of the picture.
So could they be used, I mean, I'm asking this question knowing the answer, but could you use them, say, in a rotation? If you were refusing to use your nitrogen fertilizers, you didn't want to use your synthetic nitrogen, would there be a way to utilize either the herbal lays or some of the nitrogen fixing plants, like you're saying, to do the job for you, to do the job of that synthetic nitrogen?
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively what we're doing it for. Yeah, that's exactly the reason we're doing it. So we have these, and it's all about crop rotation at the end of the day, about mixed farming, crop rotation. It's easy to become very polarized in agriculture and to focus on one particular type of plant or one particular type of crop. But then one possible outcome of that is that you end up losing soil fertility because you're not putting it back in. And you put fertility back into the soil. So let's say you've grown a cereal crop, let's say some wheat. That's obviously taken nutrition out of the soil. It's reduced the health of the soil, if you like. And so we need to replenish that in some way. One way we can do that is we can have animals grazing an area for a period of time, pooing on the area and reintroducing all of those lovely, those microorganisms and fertility back into the soil. You can have plants growing on the area which are beneficial to the soil. So again, this herbal lay system is very much both of those things. It's plants which improve soil and also animals grazing those plants, which is also improving the soil. Of course, you can do it artificially, but that's what we're trying to avoid. And so yes, your follow-on crop, so after you've taken away that herbal mixture or that grass mixture, whatever it might be, you can then plant your cash crop. And your cash crop might be any of the cereals, wheat, barley, oats, so on and so forth. And so the idea is very much, as you say, to create this crop rotation where you're giving yourself a chance to not only improve the soil in between your cash crops, but really importantly, there's other pests and weeds and things out at the moment which are a real problem. I mean, wild oats are a really common one, but these days we have something called blackgrass. It's been around for a while now, and it's a real problem in arable crops. And it's building significant chemical resistance. So one of the only ways to combat that is to grow a grass crop and get it grazed, and then the animals keep on top of that for you. It's almost like a proven method, but because it involves bringing animals back onto the farm, which isn't to be sniffed at, it's quite a complicated thing to do. You know, the infrastructure you need and the cost and animals. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen Mr. Clarkson have fun with various different types of livestock, and you know, and it's no joke keeping livestock. It's really difficult. They do have a habit of just keeling over. So we have to do the best we can to look after them. But I think this system of having a soil improving, crop rotating lay, which animals can graze on, and then you can follow on with a cereal crop, is sort of the holy grail, really. There's questions about how much food we can produce like that. But I think the quality of the actual food that is produced, the quality of the soil, and the benefits for the farmer, for all sorts of reasons, environmentally and also financially, means that this is a method that can't be sniffed at. We have to look at it because I think it's got a lot of potential. Very low input, low cost, but we need to increase the knowledge because it's a slightly more complex thing to do.
So to go back to Cotswold Seeds then, you mentioned about how you've you brought your systems knowledge, your IT knowledge to the team. How did that change the way that Cotswold Seeds functions and runs as far as the consumer is concerned?
I've got to be really careful not to blow my own trumpet here, but it was at a time when it was just the advent of the internet, and the internet was just gaining momentum. And so in turn, with knowing that actually by having a computer you can achieve a lot in a short space of time, you also have to have the software and everything that goes on that in order to allow you to operate. And my whole aspect was, how can I increase the output of Cotswold Seeds without having to increase the headcount too much? And so by making the people that do work for us more efficient, using some bespoke programs for processing orders that allow us to create all these wonderful recipes of different species, being able to print off labels as we see fit for carriers and things like that, for getting the stuff delivered, the official labels that go on the bags, all of that we were able to develop and improve in-house to make it more efficient.
Is that the Cotswold Seeds bags that you're referring to?
Oh, those very famous green Cotswold Seeds bags that you might have to see behind me. Yeah, fantastic, those things. Don't like the fact that they're plastic, really don't. But they are multiple use, and we have to make sure that the seeds get to our customers in one piece. And when you're sending an individual bag like this, you know, if anybody has any experience with carriers, sometimes they can be quite robust with your with your material. So you have to be careful. You have to make sure that the seed gets there in one piece, because seed flows like water if you make a little hole in the bag. So that's why these bags have become so popular, because they are multiple use. We are always looking at ways of replacing the material that we're using. And every year we're looking at it, but we have to make sure that we can get the seed to the customer in one piece. And that's important too.
And you mentioned before, we were just chatting before we started recording, about how your love of the systems and the IT has been channeled into your enthusiasm for beekeeping.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, my sort of the modules I did at university were intelligent systems, which is effectively like machine learning and AI. And what that did is when you're doing some of that programming, it's quite funny. You have, if anybody's listened to this podcast from Oxford Brookes University computer science department, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But we used to have this little program called OB World. And what you would do is you'd have to create lots of little beings. And those beings would have lots of little rules attached to them, but not lots actually, just some basic rules, maybe 2 or 3 rules. If you see another being, you walk towards it. If you see some grass on the ground, you eat it. And if you are attacked by another being, you die, those sorts of things. And you've got to build these little systems. And so these are systems of lots of little individual beings which interact with each other to produce an outcome which might not be expected. And so that I immediately saw the connection between that and how bees operate and bee colonies. It's not a very traditional way to come into beekeeping, but it was something which I very early on I spotted, and it was nice to have that analogy for me when I was programming. It was because, of course, I'd worked at Cotswold Seeds by the time I went to university a little bit, so I was kind of a bit tuned into what we were doing at that point. And yeah, it's a very strange connection, but it was one that worked for me. So I always, to me, the world is a huge system. Of lots of different inputs. It's incredibly complex, and sometimes the outputs are pretty unpredictable. And it's just the same like that with seed mixtures. You put different seeds together in different conditions, you will get unexpected outcomes. But some of them will be really good and unexpected. Some of them maybe not so. But you can manage it to try and get the outcomes you want. So yeah, somehow I managed to work IT and artificial intelligence into these things. But it works in my head, which is a very scary place.
And you keep bees on the farm. And at FarmED,
yes.
And you mentioned before the link between Cotswold Seeds and FarmED, and you've been on the ground floor here since day one. Is that right?
Yeah. So I remember the day when I saw Ian when he came back from having gone to auction, and he was looking rather pale. And I think the words that were going through his head, I'll leave one word out, but what have I done? And I think
and mortgage. I think,
yeah,
as well.
and mortgage, yeah. But it was, I remember that day, and it was really interesting, but really exciting all at the same time, because it was an obvious expansion for, at the time, what we thought it might be a model farm for Cotswold Seeds. As it's turned out, it hasn't ended up that way at all. It's got its own identity and does its own thing. But yeah, I mean, I put bees into the farm in 2012 or 2013, which feels like yesterday, but it really wasn't, was it? I'm really starting to feel my age as these decades fly by. But yeah, the bees went in 2012, 2013, and that was a really lovely activity. That was the first thing we did on the farm, the first activity at all. We hadn't even planted any crops at that point. Then we quickly got on with planting some herbal lays and some sainfoin, another plant that's very close to my heart, another novel legume which we need to use more. It's been a long and winding road, and when we bought FarmED, it just made sense. It was in the right place, it was the right time, and it was a really, really good opportunity, and it's turned out spectacularly, and the team here are just wonderful,
Yeah, we are.
It's it's not which of course but yeah.
So we've touched on a little bit about nitrogen fixing as well, and a bit about carbon fixation, these plants that take care of these things. But to the average person who might be listening, what is the relevance of greenhouse gases in terms of what is the herbal lay doing in terms of greenhouse gases like carbon and nitrous oxides? Why would herbal lays be of interest to the average person?
Well, I think firstly, the most obvious bit is that because we're planting plants that don't need a lot of fertilizer, that means instantly we're not applying it. So if we're not applying fertilizer, obviously that's a huge benefit, and I think that's probably one of the three sort of big hitting benefits of herbal lays is you don't have to use the fertilizer, because of course the clovers do that for you. which is lovely. You know, the clovers fix that nitrogen, and like I said, they exchange it with the rest of the plants, which is brilliant. So that's a really obvious one. Another really fantastic one, which probably not a lot of people would think about, is that using all these wonderful plants that build up a population of different microbes in the soil. These microbes work together and they build homes. And that's what soil is. Soil is a home for microbes. If a soil doesn't have microbes in it, you probably struggle to call it soil, because that's what soil is made of. It's made of organic matter mixed with rock, mixed with biological organisms, and together they make a soil. It's not just mud. It's quite important that people realise that it's a home for lots of bugs and swimmers, as I like to call them. Those homes are made of carbon, and so are the bugs and the swimmers. So what happens is these plants draw down the carbon through photosynthesis into the ground, and all the bugs and swimmers make use of that carbon and keep it locked up in the soil. And we're doing some really, really interesting research at the moment in conjunction with lots of different organisations across the UK, NIAB, Cotswold Seeds, obviously, FarmED, Elsom Seeds, lots of different companies, 23 partners in all. And we're working together to try and understand this whole concept, this synergy, this action, this machine, if you like, that draws down that carbon from the atmosphere and locks it up in the soil. Because it's one thing drawing that carbon down, but it's another thing completely keeping it there and trying to keep it stored there. And the key to that is biology. And more plants, more diversity of plants means more diversity of biology, which means more carbon sequestered and held in the soil.
It seems fairly logical when you put it like that, doesn't it?
It
just
is,
makes sense.
yeah. But obviously a lot of these things, unless you really work through the logic, you wouldn't necessarily get to that point. And another method, which I think is really interesting, is some of these novel legumes like sainfoin, like bird's-foot trefoil, which are, and chicory actually, really, really interesting because they can help the animal to process the nutrition differently. So instead of doing lots of burping and farting, we can make sure that energy is better used and maintained in the animal and used for putting on weight and for the health of the animal. So you get these things, for example, in sainfoin. The Latin is Onobrychus ficifolia. It is a plant which was grown in our area in the Cotswolds and our light brashy soil and other areas hundreds of years ago, and it used to be a staple crop for feeding working horses and for all the reasons that we've just discussed. It's a nitrogen fixer. But one of the things it has is these tannins that you have in tea. Slightly different chemical structure. But these tannins, what they do is they bind onto the protein in the food, as well as other things, like worms and things as well, because they've got health benefits with regards to worms as well. But these tannins, they're quite sticky.
When you say worms, do you mean
nematodes?
Parasitic worms?
Yeah, parasitic worms that we try and keep at a level in animals, otherwise it can hinder the animal. And we have worms in us as well, really, really important. We would not exist without them, but we need to keep them at a sensible level. And I think the way that we've grazed animals in the past has sort of lended itself to them ingesting those worms again, grazing on the same area for long periods of time, and also our artificial wormers that the farming industry has been using. Again, a bit like some of those weeds are becoming resistant to some of the chemicals, so are the worms in animals. So we need to find other more holistic ways of managing worms, and we can use these plants to do it. And so these tannins that I was telling you about, because they're sticky on the surface, they stick to the worm, and they stop its mouth from working, and they stop it sheathing and taking its outer sheath off. Careful, because I'll get too scientific with you. But essentially, it just disrupts their reproductive cycle, as well as preventing them from eating. And so we can naturally control worms in animals by using a good proportion of these plants in the mixtures. But you have to have a good proportion, not just loads of grass and a little bit of this stuff. It has to be a fair proportion of the mixture. You're looking for, a good, half the mixture you want of these types of plants if you can. But going back to what I was saying earlier about the methane reduction and the greenhouse gases, so not only do these tannins help with the worms, they also, with their sticky surfaces, they also bond to the proteins in the food. And so rather than, like you and I, when we're eating, we might go like that, just to let a little bit of gas out. That's what happens with cows as well. The food is being processed in their tummies, and they're producing gas. And one of those gases is methane, obviously a greenhouse gas. And because these tannins in some of these plants bind onto the protein, they stop the animal from breaking it down in their first stomach. So these cows and sheep have multiple stomachs. And so we want the protein, the important stuff, that's going to feed them. We want it to break down in, laterally, in the hind gut, not as soon as they put it in their mouth.
Yeah.
And so these tannins can help to prevent that. So, and we've done various projects over the years looking into this and proving that this is the case. One of them was Legume Plus, which I was heavily involved with some years ago now, maybe 15 years ago, something like that. And now we're working with NIAB and the wonderful Lydia Smith over there on this CHC project.
What does that stand for?
So it's the Centre for High Carbon Catcher Cropping. So it's a lot of C's. But essentially what we're saying is we're looking for crops which are going to help us capture lots of carbon across the agricultural sector, whether that be energy crops that people put into digesters or whatever to create energy, whether it be cover crops to help cover the soil in between crops, like over the winter, for example, or whether it be, in our case, like the herbal lays, which are in for a period of time. We're just looking at all these different crop types and trying to understand how and how much of this carbon they're going to keep or extract from the atmosphere and hold in the soil.
So there's lots of different plants and wildflowers and all sorts of things you've mentioned over the course of this conversation, and all the amazing, interesting things they do that most people might not realise. Are there? Well, I'm going to refer to them as garden variety plants, but I don't literally mean they're in your garden. As in, like the average plants you might see out and about and think, there's nothing special about that. It's a dandelion or whatever. Are there any ones that people are seeing day to day that might have a little bit more to them, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more useful than we perhaps give them credit for?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and there are also some plants which you never see, which are also really important as well, so that you kind of have both ends of the spectrum. So I think if you're looking at a very common plant, which everybody will be used to, if you've gone out to your local recreation ground, typically in the spring, it will be covered in dandelions. Dandelions? They're a weed, aren't they? Well, what's a weed? A weed is just a plant where you didn't expect it, or perhaps where you don't want it. I would argue dandelions are probably one of the most valuable bee pollen and nectar sources early in the season of any plant. Another plant which would be a real big one, which farmers would be familiar with as well, would be white clover. Those little white sort of bauble looking flowers that you see in most places. You'll have them in your back lawn, I'm sure.
That's a clover that's also fixing the nitrogen as well.
Absolutely. So that's the clover that's fixing the nitrogen. So yeah, these plants have multiple benefits, and a lot of people don't know about them. But yeah, white clover, because it comes out all year round. It flowers extensively during the year, but it's quite hardy. It's always there. It's reliable. Stays green over the winter, that kind of thing. So yeah, white clover is sort of an unsung hero, really. But there are all sorts of other clovers and trefoils and flowering plants which are so important. And I think the diversity is the key. Putting these plants together, so you're creating a succession of flowering for the insects and the pollinators, as well as a succession of forage for the animals and things like that as well. Other plants which are less well known, that should be better known, and you know what I'm going to say is sainfoin, because I think it's just the best plant in the world. But that is an incredible plant. I mean, incredible for honey production, because it is just a fantastic pollen and nectar source. Pollen and nectar both being very important for bees, because they're used for different purposes. You've got the very deep rooting nature of it, so in dry times, and this weather is just getting more extreme. So in dry times, the plants like the sainfoin in these herbal lays and in our environmental verges and, even naturally in the wild are really important for our wildlife. And it's also a legume, so it fixes its own nitrogen, as we discussed before. It's very palatable. It tastes great for the cows and the sheep. It flowers for a long period of time as well, the sainfoin. If you're not careful, I'm going to talk a lot about sainfoin. But there are these plants which are so important that people don't know about. And some of them are hiding in plain sight. I think hawthorn, is a really important plant that people often overlook. For a beekeeper, hawthorn produces pollen and nectar for bees at all ends of the spectrum of the seasons, where other plants have died and gone away. They're not flowering at all. So I think all of these things, not just in our agricultural fields, but they're hiding in plain sight, and people often forget just how important they are. But yeah, it's a good question though, because I think I would say also cowslips. Very important. You tend to find cowslips coming up very, very early in the season, and often that's when a lot of insects struggle, because the weather's warming up, the plants haven't quite caught up yet, And these few sort of pioneer plants which come out early in the season are vital for the things like bumblebees. I mean, you see bumblebees literally bumbling around when the frosts have barely stopped. And you think to yourself, what on earth are you doing? You know, and you think to yourself, well, I hope you find some cowslips somewhere or some hawthorn or whatever. But yeah, fascinating world we live in, isn't it? But
absolutely.
But yeah.
So to wrap up, to start to end what we've been chatting about, from what you've seen in terms of your herbal lays and providing for farmers and what farmers are looking for and thinking about in terms of what they need on their land, what do you think the future of food and farming, in particular in the UK, should look like? What do you think it will look like? What do you think it should look like?
That's a very big question.
It's a very big question, isn't it?
That's a very big question. And if I answer it too specifically, there's a lot of opinions, you know, there's a lot of perspectives and different angles that I will and won't have, you know, and there'll be things that I don't understand. But I would say that we're all tired, well, probably, of this word called diversity. But it's so important in so many aspects of our existence. If we want different types of insect, if we want different types of humans, if we want different types of plants, if we want different types of food, then we have to look at diversity. And what goes unseen is what is the diversity that is so important in the soil. It all starts with the soil. It looks like just brown stuff that you stand on, but it's vitally important. And I think if going forward that we put as much importance into the maintenance of the soil fertility in a more natural way, then we will have a system which is much more sustainable. Again, another cringe term that's been, you know, absolutely not abused, but, you know, sort of used a lot.
Yeah, co-opted slightly.
And these terms can be quite faddish, you know. And I think that regenerative farming is the way forward. And I think, but that name in itself will get boring. It will get tired. But the concept is the same. Regenerative farming, in my view, is just good farming. Rotation where you can, improve the soil where you can, so that we can carry on farming into the future for as long as possible. Now, will that produce enough food if every farmer was farming in that way? Maybe, maybe not. But that's not the only method of farming out there. You know, there's lots of different technologies coming about, and I don't know which one is gonna be the most popular. What I do know, though, is that if we need to keep farming, if we want to keep farming, and we want to look after our environment, and we want to look after the arena that we live in, then we're going to have to look after it. And farming, chemical farming in the traditional sense, is making that really difficult, or has made it really difficult. And we can see measured results showing that we've depleted the soil. So I think whatever it looks like, it needs to look, or should look, diverse. Farm rotations, crop rotations, livestock in the most responsible way possible. And just an understanding that it is a whole system. And if you neglect any one part of it, it will come back to bite you eventually, and unfortunately probably in your pocket. So it's that sort of forethought and trying to plan for the future, and it's really painful. It's really difficult to do, because this regenerative farming business it can be difficult to see the wood for the trees, and it can mean a lot of different things to different people. I think if you keep at the heart of it, building soil, if you're building soil without using artificial chemicals, then in my view, you're a lot of the way there. I think sometimes it's too tempting to try and narrow these phrases down to a specific meaning. And I understand that, because in order to get people to understand what we're trying to communicate, there needs to be some kind of framework, there needs to be some kind of understanding, or even certification, you know, just like there is in the organic movement. But I think with regen, there's a risk that we might throw the baby out with the bathwater if we go trying to simplify it too much. It means different things for different people, and different activities in different places for different reasons. We have to look at what ground we have and use it to its best potential, and try not to force things out of it that it can't give, or that it can't give in the long term. We need to only take what it can afford to give. And then if we have to find other ways around that to supplement our diets, then so be it. But we all need somewhere to live.
thank you very much for your time today, Paul. It's been great chatting with you. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground today.
Yes,
bees and flowers
we've
and
covered
Cotswold
quite a lot
seeds.
of soil. Yeah,
lots of soil. Very good. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for tuning into the FarmED podcast. Give us a review, give us a rating if you've enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. And thank you again, Paul.
No, thank you. Thanks for listening.
And thanks to Billy as well. Here he is.
Here he is.